We should maybe briefly just say who we are.
I'm Daniel, and I'm a master student at the Techno-Anthropology.
I'm Andrea, member of Density Design Lab.
And me too, I'm Beatrice, member of Density Design.
I called you against it.
Oh.
I'm Andreas, I'm an assistant professor in the Techno-Anthropology group and in 10 Lab. And we should also give credit to Louise Watson, who was part of the group, and Jakob, who was also part of the group but had to leave for a meeting, and Mette, Abildgaard, who was also part of the group. So more work went into this than you can see here. So let us quickly give you an idea about what kind of data did we work on. What was sort of our frame. We made the most of the fact that Anders Munch has collected a lot of data from one single Facebook group called Amager Fælles Venner, the friends of an area on the Copenhagen island of Amager, which is an area currently potentially under development. And this group is about protecting it against being developed. And Anders gathered 16 months of activity from this group, and it's a very active group, and we will bring some numbers to the table later in terms of how much data we have. But thanks of course to Anders for that, and for us that was a good framing for the project to make it feasible within the short time frame to have a data set. So we accepted the limits of this data set, although we can come back to ideas about how to expand it. So we started out from maybe a too long list of research questions, some of which we have answered, some of which we have not touched so much upon. But the basic idea of the ambiguous timeline project is this idea that in a controversy, if you decide to use digital methods to map controversies, there will often be different timelines, or at least it will be a political decision or a normative decision what the timeline looks like. So can we try and find ways to make that ambiguity visible? How do we identify multiple timelines in a controversy? How do we talk about when they overlap, when they do not overlap? And how do we foreground ambiguity when it comes to timelines? So if you need an example to think about this, you can think about how a controversy about the development of an area might touch upon something that would have to do with nature preservation and biodiversity, but it can also touch upon funding and financial concerns and the fact that this development was supposed to co-finance the metro system in Copenhagen. So controversies have these different aspects, and they will enact different timelines. So for some of these aspects, it's important that whether or not the EU has decided that one frog is something you need to protect, or for another timeline, it will be important that the metro was decided upon in '92. So that's the kind of initial idea that we approach the project with. Do you want to start here?
Okay, yes, this is briefly what was our protocol, and we started from, 2009, a lot of, I don't see really the number, but a lot of posts collected by Anders. And then...
Yeah, so that's the total amount of posts in the Facebook group.
Yes, yes.
In the 16 months.
Yes, that's it. And then we trying to do like a frame by a value that is that's what's called multivalence. I mean, we collected all the data and we look at which data had more than 3 kinds of reaction. I mean, we selected the posts that had more controversy inside, because if people reacted with angry or wow and love, it's something that it's sparkling. So we selected a little amount of posts, and then we've seen that there are a most active period from August to October, and then we make this latest time frame. And yes, this is in the protocol. And
it will be developed.
Yes, step by step, and you will see all the part. And this is in detail what was the queries definition. I mean, we selected some topics, and with the help of Anders, we selected some words related to each topics.
And we can, just to briefly answer this, this is the concrete example of what we mean when we talk about multiple issues being at work in a controversy. So we have 15 different concepts, such as a concern about nature, a concern about golf, a concern about a campsite, a concern about a tunnel, finance, metro, housing, and so on. So these are the different issues or concerns, or what you want to call them, that could enact different timelines inside the controversy.
VVM?
VVM is an environmental impact study that is required to do development in a Danish context. Anja?
How did you decide on those categories?
Yeah, so we started with Anders Munk's list, which was shorter, maybe less than half this length, which had informed the first part of the study of this Facebook group, and then we worked manually through a lot of the posts and read through it to develop a stronger issue dictionary, we could call it. So it's based on four people's qualitative reading through of some of the main activity in this group. And then each time we identified something that would be a good keyword, such as valgflæsk or valgsejr, which points directly to a theme, we use that. But just the word valg in itself would be too broad, because that could appear in Danish both as a noun and as a verb.
Yes, and then here, yes, you have the detail of our corpus selection and definition, because before we had this big amount of posts, and then we selected by the time frame filtering only a little amount of posts that are the most controversial and the most intense period of activity of the page, because also of the growing of the page, because yes, I think that's in the end, from August to October, the page grew up, so there's more users active on it.
There's about 10,000 users that have been active in this page, and 25,000 interactions. So it's a rather large group.
Yes, and here you can see the explanation of what I said before, because this is all the activity from July 2016 to October 2017. And here you can see the period, the time frame where we focused on.
Yeah, with the large intensity near the end of 2017.
Yes, and of course here on the right you can see all the different issues.
And maybe we should explain briefly how we got that data. So we used a custom Python script that Anders Munk built for this project, which asks whether these keywords that we had built before in the query appear in a post. So that's why we are able to make timelines for each individual concern or issue term.
Yes, and here in the next slide you can see from another perspective how the issues grew up during time. And yes, this is another perspective that maybe makes it more clear. And now we can jump to the real focus.
Yeah.
And
so we had, based on the research questions, things developed in sort of correspondence with the data, of course, and this is what we started to sort of get at. So one kind of ambiguity that we wanted to focus on is, as we already said, how do you define an event in the first place? What comes to count as an event if your way of doing controversy mapping is to build a timeline of controversy? So, and the question about what defines an event, of course, also points to what defines a timeline at all. And so we started to think about this, the various ways in which Facebook group data is a specific way of drawing a timeline, which lets you build from the activity of a group of activists and build perhaps a timeline that is quite different from the one you would get from using data from the news media or from institutionalized actors and so on. So here are three ways in which we started to think about ambiguities as we tried to work through this Facebook data. So one thing is exactly this dispersion or this difference between what is an event in the sort of the commonsensical way of a news story. So if you follow journalistic criteria, there's an event when new information comes out which might shift the controversy. And sometimes that's what explains a peak in Facebook activity. But at other times, it becomes more blurred what should count as an event, because it could also be emerging discussions about financing, or it could be mobilization efforts where a video proves super successful. Where, for example, if it's a famous chef called Nikolai Kirk producing videos, that's not an event necessarily, because it doesn't necessarily have news value in the journalistic sense, but it's very much an event in the history of the Facebook group. So if you take if you think the timeline through Facebook, you have to handle ambiguity when it comes to what is an event. And that speaks to the second point, which is sort of what are the blurred lines between various Facebook formats. So Facebook also has an official format called an event, which is a thing you can set up and then you can invite people. So we try to also keep that ambiguity in our work, and we will see that in a moment. And finally, the way we sort of scoped down, as you explained, Beatrice, we move from a large number of posts to a very small number of posts by using ambiguous measures. So we both take into account how there can be a popularity measure, where you could simply just select posts based on which one have been most successful in terms of sparking reactions. But you can also have what we call a multi-valence measure, which we operationalized as 3 or more different emojis being in use. So there's an ambiguity there in terms of what are good Facebook-centric criteria for selecting the top events. Is it multi-valence in reactions, or is it number of reactions?
So we can see the result of these questions that we had in mind in our visualization. This is how we can read it. And the visualization is composed by 2 different parts. One are the issues and how they peaked in relevance through time. And for each peak that shows an issue convergence between the different issues, where issues share posts and events that spiked engagement, we actually went and looked at the posts that were posted in the Facebook group, and we categorized them by the Facebook type of posts that you can create. For example, text, photo, videos, links, and events. There were a couple of exceptions, like multiple categories, for example, link and photos, a couple of posts that had the same content, the same photo, and some further exceptions like the text of a song and links to other Facebook pages. So this is the first result of our visualization process, and we can see the different issues and when they start in our time frame, and we highlighted the dates where the total number of reactions spiked across different issues, sharing these posts that were posted on the Facebook group. So we can see a zoom here, for example, in the 29th of August, we see there are 5 different posts the 28th, that spiked the engagement on the Facebook group, and 3 of them are videos, 1 is text, and 1 is a photo. And we'll see later what happened that day. And we can see how the evolution of concurrencies of issues evolved through this time frame. But this visualization was not actually the final step, because we printed it and we decided to work on that to further deepen the analysis. And this is what we came up with. And maybe you can say.
Well, what is really interesting here is so we categorized it into 3 stages, as you might see. It's a bit messy, but there are the first very interesting stage that we talked about was centered around the 28th of August, where the developer hired by or created by the municipality started doing soil samples. This is foreshadowed a bit. You see. This is foreshadowed a bit. You can see the square with the line through it. I wish I had something to point with. But where it is talked about that this might happen soon. A few days later.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. A few days later, there's then these photo and video posts about how the developer goes out and does soil samples, which then are very pictures of and videos of ground torn up and dead frogs and and stuff like that.
So so that's sort of an interpretation of what happened in the first sort of active part of this time frame. And what we started to get increasingly interested in, I mean, in a way, this is a visualization that's very nice because it allowed us to further explore the data and the ambiguities in the data. And so we took the opportunity to annotate it like this. And what we got really interested in is, or one of the questions is, that we also started out with, is how some events unite issues and some events do not. So can we start to look at different timelines in this graph? So we identified 3 moments at which there was some kind of confluence between issues. And the soil sampling was the first one, where the concern about nature and endangered species was connected to the developers and the VVM that was mentioned before. And a second moment later on, where there was political unrest and lack of clarity as to what the decision makers wanted to do, where other actors came in and connected the concerns about the metro and financing and so on. And finally, a third moment towards the end, where the Lord Mayor decided to drop the development, at least in that fashion, of the area, which was an opportunity to disconnect again some of the issues. So we started to ask ourselves how we could visualize the confluence and non-confluence of the different issues inside the consortium over time.
So this is the second visualization that is on top of the one that we created before. It's basically the same concept. We have different issues mapping posts in time, but this time we're actually looking at the number of posts, not the engagement that they gathered in the Facebook page in the first half of the visualization. And in the second visualization, we can see how the different issues are mapped through time, where there are actually a lot of issues in the vertical axis. It means that there were a lot of convergences between issues in that precise day. And we can see we use the first 2 letters, for example, EN stands for endangered, nature, and so on and so on. And here we can see how the controversy is expanding and retracting in different issues, and it can be seen through the eyes of the events that were generated by data in Facebook and the events that are newsworthy.
Yes.
This is the second half.
Yes, the idea was also to link all the same issue through time by line, but maybe it's a bit of work.
Yeah, one of the next steps that we could take.
But it should be maybe more clear to link the same issues through time, in order to see like this divergence and convergence along time. And I think that's.
Yeah, that's. I mean, this was based on an example with one data from one Facebook group, and there could be much more work done also inside that group. For instance, we could look not just at the post, but at the comments with Anders' scripts let us do, and in that sense get a more a deeper understanding of confluences between issues by having a broader database. And we could, as you said, we could move further towards emphasizing where different timelines start and stop and how they converge and do that.
Thank you.
About 10 minutes for questions. So.